thank you all so much for coming out tonight. We're going to get started with tonight's meeting. So just a couple of quick announcements. Our next meeting is going to be August 8th, and we're going to be having Cliff Anderson speaking about something super cool that will be announced in the future. For tonight, we have Cesar Suarez. Just to give a quick...
Thank you.
As a quick introduction, I'm sure he's also going to talk about, what he's been doing as well, but Cesar is also Berklee alumni. He was a film scoring major. Right now he's working as a freelance sound designer, working with Fastestmanintheworld Media. And he's also audio director at ROTU Entertainment Media.
That's correct.
I will let you take it away.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, hey guys, how you doing? Like you said, I'm Cesar Suarez, and I was actually Michael's student way back, so props.
And you're working, thank God.
I know. Yeah. So and this is right here. This is Amir's sermon. He's the game director. That actually I want to be showing a lot of. Just give you a little background. I'm not an expert in game audio, but I have been working in game audio for around 4 years and in VR for 2. So I'm going to share my experience. And please feel free to ask any questions during my presentation. I'm not like one of those, hey, hold your questions till the end. None of that. If you have a question, we can stir up some discussion. And if you think there's something wrong, let me know. Let's totally free to open up for discussion. So, yes, right now I'm working on Rhythm of the Universe, and it's a music adventure game. It's very, very musical. So I think this really encapsulates what Game Audio Boston is wants to bring to the table. So without further ado, let's get started. So best practices and guidelines. So that's a very key word. It's a guideline. Don't take it as scripture. But this is just my experiences of how I faced the challenges, and some of the things that I noticed that around the industry was something that seems to be common, attenuations and things like that, and placement, localization, 3D audio plugins, all this kind of great stuff to make your audio really, really cool. And we're shooting for world-class audio. That's something that I learned from Duncan. How important is audio in VR? I think it's the most important. More important than narrative, more important than everything. It's the most important thing. Why? Because audio is what makes VR feel real. Okay? My point is, it's what immerses you in the 3D environment. So I think that you need to be brought in very, very early. Because if you compare non-VR games to VR, everything in VR is interactive. Everything. I can pick up something, this item or anything, a phone, in VR, and you need to make sure there's interactive for every surface. So everything is going to be making sound. So you need to be brought in very early to discuss your systems, to discuss design, to discuss every aspect of audio, and know your limitations, know your goals, know everything. So I really think it's very important to be brought in very, very early. So everything makes noise. Everything. There's games like, let's get out of VR, there's games like Skyrim that you can pick up a lot of items, and you have to have that interactivity of sounds and physics and collisions with different materials and all that kind of stuff. But in VR, in every game that I've been able to play, sound physics is extremely important. And that can, if you don't have a good sound for that, it can really take you out of the immersion. And what we're trying to do as sound designers and audio directors and composers is sound immersion of the experience, right? So again, it's all about the immersion. Another point what I wanted to bring up is the sound is helping to drive the narrative of the story, okay? So it's extremely important to not let it get in the way, but to help drive the focus and the narrative of the story as far as sound. like I said it before, you should be involved in the process as early as possible. I felt that that was something, when I was working with ROTU, that was something really important. I was brought in early. We were able to discuss game systems and our challenges and things like that. So I think it's very important to be brought in. So to go over your audio specs, you build your audio systems, for them to let you know and communicate with the engineers, you would talk to the game engineers and let them know what you want to do and just open up that communication. Okay? Audio roadmaps and deadlines, something very important to know. When is your deadlines that you're going to meet? How much are you going to be able to get done? What are your goals? Usually they will call them in sprints. Yeah, what's up?
So when you say like you should be involved like really early in the process, my question is like, how would you manage to like get involved early, and how would you manage other projects? Because like if you need to get like in the project early, that means that that you need to take like a lot of jobs at the same time in order to manage and like be able to get paid, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how would you manage that part of the thing?
I mean, when I say get in early is when they're just about to get into production or even pre-production, you got to know what their focus is, how much audio you're going to be actually working on, I believe. They need to just be quite open. Sometimes you're going to be dealing with budgets, but it's mainly on what the scope is in audio-wise, and then that way you can manage your time on how many projects you're going to be able to bring in. So let's say you're doing a project and you have to do 2,000 sounds, and then you also have to work with the engineers to build a couple of systems. Maybe you're going to have like a crowd system or anything like that. That's going to take time. So budget your projects accordingly, right? I think that's something that you have to take into account of how much time you actually have. Okay, so I believe VR audio is really about location, where you place your emitters, spatialization. So your location of your audio emitters or your speakers is super key. In this example, this is from our demo. In this room, it's a puzzle that you have to solve. It's a musical puzzle. So in this room, you have to find these tablets that have scales. And then you have to play the scale, and it'll actually show you the order. And once you play the scale, this big tablet's going to spin, and it will reveal the land from where those tablets are from. So if I was to think of speaker placement in a non-VR setting, I would probably do something like this, right? Speaker for the tablet, where you're going to get music, maybe some sounds for these little tiny sigils spinning. The tablet will also spin in different axes. And when you're playing, you'll probably get a speaker here, maybe in the center, or maybe two, for when you're playing the keys. Now, in VR, I would probably do something like this. And I know it seems excessive, but as part of the design, which is something you're always talking to the game designers, as part of the design, what we never have any speaker playing at the same time. So it's just placement, because this may not seem big, but in VR it's gigantic. So we have to make sure that each sigil that is actually spinning is localized in 3D space properly, so we can hear where the spinning is happening. And then we can get player focused, so when that actually starts to spin, if your attention is not on what we want you to look at, we actually want you to look up, and placement is actually key. Same thing with these. So I put speakers on every key. You could play quite fast and get a lot of audio channels playing at the same time. But since these are the little mallets, you can just play up to 2 at a time, and then it'll build up a little bit. But it's really not so taxing, okay? So location is really key in VR audio. The reason why I put so many speakers, I try to mimic real life. That's something that I noticed that is really, really important. And that really goes a long way. Just mimic everything that can make sound. So mimic real life really goes a long way. Multiple sounds assets per, multiple sound sources per asset. Probably it's a good idea. Give it a try. If you think it's taxing so much, maybe take a couple out. But for us, that really worked. We didn't have that many problems with sound channels. We have I think it was a limit of 32 channel maximum, but we never faced a problem of any, when we got to the optimization phase, we never faced any problem when we did it like this. Again, so it's all about player focus. So when you play the scale, you would get a projection of the land that this tablet is from. And I'm actually going to show the gameplay footage later so you can kind of get an idea of how it goes. So you would get this beam of light, and it'll show you kind of like a projection. And we want the player to make sure to stop playing and look up and look at this video. So the player focus is very important, and how sound is driving the attention of the player, because there's so much to do in VR. You can pick up so many things. The more objects that you have to pick up, the harder it is to get their attention, because they're going to be, oh my God, look at all these really cool things, and they're going to be, I don't know if anybody has played Job Simulator. What do? You just grab everything and throw it at everything, and it gets chaotic. So designing ahead of time for player focus, that's actually very, very important. Another element, VR introduces verticality in sound. What does that mean? Now, instead of being in a 2D plane for non-VR games, you can have sounds up or down. Yes?
I have a question, just because you're talking about all of this. Do you feel that the way that you capture sounds, the way that you would choose to, say, do a footstep versus just capturing a generic footstep, changes when you're working in VR? Like the thing you're looking to capture, how you might choose to capture it changes? I'm like really uneducated on VR. So
that's okay. It's okay. I don't think so. There is a foundation principle that does stay the same, and I'm actually going to get to mono sources. But the way you capture things, it stays the same. In VR, you could use ambisonics, so that's a different way you can actually capture 3D ambiances with ambisonic microphones. So that's a different way of capturing that you probably didn't do in traditional games. But yeah, that's a good question. So it really doesn't change much of the basis of obtaining sound. It just changes a little bit of what attenuations and how you were used to in traditional games, which is you can use stereos for ambiances, but what I'm going to get to is use a lot of mono for VR. So like I was saying, so there's verticality in sound, and what phenomenon that happens when you actually have audio above you, you feel like a sense of weight above you. So it will actually capture your attention, your senses, that there's sound above you, and that there's sound under you. If there's ambiances or a very loud noises under you, actually will get a sense of like almost weightlessness, like there's something under you. So that means that music can also come into play when you're talking about placement. So you can also think about doing music vertically placed, right? So a tip would be, which I'll talk about later, a tip would be maybe doing music in multiple stems. Instead of submitting a stereo file of your music track for your scene or dynamic music, maybe think about splitting your mix in different stems and placing them in your 3D scene. That might be something really cool to try, because think about if you're going to have a choir, why not have them high up? It'll actually sound really cool in 3D space. Maybe you can have your violins here or your percussion around you. You can separate your percussion stems and actually place them around you. So in 3D space, you're actually getting a unique experience as opposed to 2D audio. Stereo music, where you're actually hearing everything on both sides, right? Cool. So another example about placement. We have a creature from our game. Now, like I said, having multiple sound sources per asset is not a bad idea. Why? Because the scale, actually don't have a sense of scale, but you're actually very small compared to this creature. And if the sound is going to be emitting from his mouth and he's breathing, you want to have that sound localized where his mouth is. Also, when he is walking, you want to hear those steps, those sound steps, footsteps from his feet. Same thing, you know. So this also applies for everything. Like if you're going to have a bus, right? You put a speaker for the engine. Maybe you put a speaker for the muffler. Things like that. So placement is really key. Mono, mono, and more mono. Please use mono sound sources. For spatialization, mono is actually very important. Try not to use stereo loops for ambiances. When I was saying before, in non-VR games, you would just create in Pro Tools or any DAW, you would just create your ambiances in your DAW, create a stereo file, and drop it in your map, and there's your ambience. When it comes to ambiances in VR, I recommend to make just separate elements of that ambience and populate your world using mono files. So using multiple audio sources, 3 to 5 sources for your ambiances. So if you have your wind sources, maybe you want to surround yourself with wind mono sounds. Maybe you have some birds that you're going to be seeing. So you would attach that sound source to the bird, and the bird will be dynamic. So start thinking about your ambiances as mimicking real life. The sounds are coming from the trees, winds, rumbles, all that kind of stuff. You know, you wanted it to be alive. Okay. So avoid phasing in ambience loops, and that means try not to use the same ambient sounds. So if you're going to have wind, try not to use the same wind, right? Because if you use the same wind, and usually the engines will, unless you tell it not to start at the same time, the engine will just start all the sounds at the same time, which will cause phasing. So try not to use the same wind sounds or the same ambient sounds. That's also going to help with your ambiences feeling more realistic. So I'm going to be talking about 3D audio plugins like Steam Audio quite a bit. I've actually been starting to use it, which is something is a really powerful tool for 3D audio. But using 3D audio for your dynamic sources, your dynamic point sources of mono sounds. What do I mean by that? It's if you're in a scene, right, and you have like a fireball, and you can create a fireball in your hand and you can throw it, that becomes a dynamic point. It's moving. So using 3D audio plugins, what it will do is you'll be able to propagate that sound in 3D space, and you'll have really good early reflections and really good reverb for it to propagate around your scene. So let's say you are in a corridor, you can spawn a fireball and then throw it down the hallway. Using these tools, it'll actually sound as the fireball is getting away, and the early reflections of the room are going to start to propagate, and you're going to actually get a little bit, more realistic sound.
So quick question.
Yep.
Does obviously for that to work, the system has to know the architecture.
Correct.
So is that automatic in terms of you apply surface textures, that's a
Right.
metal surface, and then the audio system's automatically pulling that in and saying, oh, that's a metal surface, I want to make that more reflective than this surface over here.
Correct. Yeah, so let me get to a little more in detail what Michael's talking about. So with Steam Audio, the way it works is that it actually, the plugin will give you a audio volume, per se, a volume that you can measure your space. So you can measure a room or any scene in 3D. So as you do that, you tell it how many probes. The way it works with Steam Audio is it puts audio probes all over your scene, where you can tell the spacing of the probes, and what it will do is it'll analyze any audio source, and anything close to that audio source, those probes will retain data, and it'll tell the engine how to propagate those sounds properly. Now, for the next point, which the way the Steam Audio works is that you have to tag all your static meshes with a geometry phonon, which is what they call it, geometry phonon, so you can tell the engine what is it? You can tell it what material it is. So you would have a geometry, and you would have a material phonon. So you would tell the engine that, for example, that chair, it's leather. So you would say, that chair, it's going to be receiving information from the Steam Audio engine, and this material is leather. So the engine knows, and it calculates on equations of how much reflection that material should cast, and how much it should absorb in occlusion and so and stuff like that. Very powerful, really, really cool stuff.
I assume the more of those that you have in a scene, the more CPU.
The heavier it is.
It's gonna.
So be mindful, right? Yeah, it's very, very taxing.
Yep.
The calculation of reverbs and impulse responses gets really, really heavy. When you have a very powerful machine, you could run it in real time, but I've tried it that it's actually easier to bake the reverb of your scene. So what does that mean? When you are creating the probes around your scene, let's say I'm creating this room, right? I would cast the volume, and what the engine will do is it'll, like I said, it'll create all these little blue dots all over the scene. The least you have, the better, but you're not going to get such great sound propagation. So there is a fine balance of how much you want to be able to measure the data of all the sound incoming. And it'll actually tell you how much space and how much memory you're actually generating from all this baking. So that is something to definitely look into. It's fairly new. I think it's been out for 5 months,
Yeah.
6 months.
Yeah.
So it's fairly new, but it's very powerful. Right now, I think it's in beta 3, beta 6, or something like that.
Full in 4.17.
Right.
It will be
Talking about Unreal Engine 4.17, but it works the same way in Unity. Yes.
Sorry, how is the compatibility with, like, for example, like using audio, like Oculus SDK with like Vive and other headsets? Because I guess like Steam VR is compatible with almost every
right.
like VR head, like a Steam headset. But is the Oculus like strictly like for the Oculus, or can you use it for us?
I'm not really sure about that.
It works with.
It
I've
should.
been using Oculus SDK with the 5 minute. It works the same.
It should,
I don't
right.
think
Yeah.
Steam Audio works with Unity yet. I tried
It does.
Are you sure?
It does.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it does.
Well, I just have to look at
I mean, again, these are like week by week changes,
Yeah.
but it actually first started working with Unity.
Because it stopped working with Unity for a while with like a new release of Unity or something like that.
When I first tried it, it was terrible. It was like absolutely bone crushing and terrible.
I've heard
And
that
then
from
it's
a lot of
got, but
people.
it is kind of like week to week. They put out a
Right.
build that works a little better, and then it completely crashes.
Yeah. If you browse the forums, there's so many like
it's
not working. Blah, blah,
Mm.
blah. I even have a comment in there.
Oculus SDK has been pretty stable. It's just a lot simpler. It doesn't give you if you want to like have dynamic changing rooms, you'd have to have like RGBCs for like raycasts around the player.
Right.
For the room and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. In Steam Audio, you can choose the way it either does a raycast or it does bilateral measuring. So very powerful. I mentioned Steam Audio a lot and other 3D audio plugins. they're really, really good for your ambiances. So I definitely recommend looking into it. If you don't really understand how it works, there's so much resources out there, and actually we'll mention some of the resources you can look into. Right, so what some of these 3D plugins will do is it'll measure the room geometry, like I just mentioned, calculate early reflections, and identify environment materials, which is very important to get proper reflections of things. You know, like glass is very, very reflective. They're still working on it. It's not 100% great, and this is still very new, but it's from what I've been able to obtain, it's quite powerful. It's really cool. Really useful too. Once you're in your DAW, you can actually test things in your DAW as you're creating your ambiances. So you don't actually have to go into this, creating your sound assets, bringing it into the engine. You can actually test and start to hear how your ambient sounds work in your DAW already. So there is a VST specialization plugin for Oculus. You can actually start to hear how things are working in your DAW before you even bring it to your engine. So that way you can speed up the process a little bit before you start, going to that migration. Yeah.
What would that plugin be called, by the way?
I think it's the Oculus VST spatialization plugin. It's literally that, yeah.
Awesome.
And I have a towards the end of my presentation, I have a slide of a bunch of resources, so you guys can take a picture. Oh, there it is, Oculus VST Spatializer. There it is. Other really cool plugins from noisemakers, Ambihead, look into that. Really cool for getting binaural audio, and you can start, you can actually, in Pro Tools, you can actually map sounds, kind of like in, I don't know if you guys are Wise users. In Wise, you can actually map and do dynamic sound movement in like around your head. So it does the same thing. You can actually map sounds. So let's say you have like a little bird. You can actually have the bird go around you and things like that. It's really cool. It's really powerful. Definitely recommend it. It's just so you start thinking in 3D for audio. Cool. So here's an example. So I just started putting some sounds in a scene. Yeah, so for example, because our game is very musical, so you can see that we have plant life in shapes of French horns and things like that. There's a sound source for every single guy there. You can have a lot of flexibility in how much the sound concurrency happens, like how many sounds can I have at a particular time, so you're not taxing you're not taking a big chunk of your audio memory budget. I don't know if you guys understand. So you can say, I want to be able to hear the closest sounds to me, and for any other sounds that are too far away, you can either virtualize them or make sure that the engine's not even playing those. So there's a lot of optimization things for audio. So when you are actually getting worried, you're like, wow, there's a lot of emitters compared to how it used to be. Oh, it used to be, wow. How it is in non-VR games. There is these optimizations which they come from non-VR games. So it's still the same thing. So I guess it kind of answered your question that you brought up before. There is still a lot of things that are tied together from non-VR games to VR. So as you can see, this is my overall scope. I kind of did a top view, an overall sense of my ambience in the scene. So there's sound coming from everywhere. So I don't have just one stereo ambience engulfing the entire scene. There's different sounds everywhere, okay? So this is something I just wanted to show you guys to kind of get your head around. Ambiances need to be in mono, and they need to be around you so you can feel. So once you're turning your head, you actually can hear them in different places. So here's another example about ambience. So in this scene, so we have these creatures, and I'm going to be applying the same techniques I was telling you about, sound placement on the creatures. But as an example, I would probably do something like this. Speakers on the creatures, some speakers for ambience, and some speakers for music. Okay? Ambient speakers. Place one here, maybe for some sounds of sand, maybe the sound of wind coming through this opening tunnel. It'll probably be in some high pitch, you know. And maybe some from here for different wind sounds, just so you can get a sense for the space. The creature has its own speakers. Here for this creature actually breathes. You can actually see the sides expand. And when it breathes, it actually blows some kind of like musical kind of overtones. And it communicates with this gigantic herd of shurangis, which is what they're called. So there's different sound emitters and sound sources for them as well. And again, music speakers. Placing them around you. Maybe here's my choir, maybe here's my violins, maybe some percussion. You know, you get the idea. So, yes?
Would that be an example of a time you would want to lock the speakers to the head of the person wearing the headset?
Actually,
or what was your decision making on that?
Yeah, I've done a little bit of research about that. There's some people that say try not to lock anything to the player.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and there's people that say the other thing. Because the moment that you actually, let's say I just have 3 speakers, right? You know, violins, percussion behind me or something, or maybe 2 for percussion and maybe low frequencies or basses, right? The moment you have that attached to the player, it's going to be around me all the time. Yeah. So the question is, will that throw you out of the VR experience, or the immersion that you're going to have? Or can you walk up to your bases and actually experience them in different angles? So these are the questions you kind of have to start bringing up. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's also changing with the 3D headphones. You know, and that's the, I think, biggest issue that we have, because, you know, I think biggest frustration that we still have the stereo headphones, but the things that we trying to put it, but we don't feel the distance as much as we, you know, designing it, but there's no distance. So whoever really come up with that, the best engineering on 3D headphones, our life's going to be completely easier on that.
And it's tricky too, because in this sort of situation, if the player can move enough, then they have control over the mix. So like what you're saying, if they can get closer to the bases, but there's no specific object visible that the bases are tied to, and like the mix changes and it becomes really bassy all of a sudden, and you don't have like a visual reference, I feel like that could potentially be disorienting. So I don't know. It's kind of an interesting.
But these are good questions, though.
Well,
I mean, these. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'd be curious. Like, I understand like rotationally not locking it because that would break the experience. But what about like, have you ever locked it distance-wise? You can't get close to the music, so then you don't get that issue of like a mix, but you still have that surrounding VR feel.
Yeah, there's actually, I saw this video from Epic has an audio engineer that works for them. And what he did was he had a 5.1 system of hidden speakers always following the player. And he was able to actually send different mixes to those speakers in 3D space. So that kind of, if he's getting too close to something else, maybe he would shift some audio. So, I mean, it's really getting out there, but that could be a solution. Maybe have a virtual 5.1 setup around the player, and that way he moves with the music, right?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, I was going to say, Wise is a really easy way to kind of do that, where you can just set everything to 3D and then just have it, but give it a fixed position relative to the player.
Right.
You don't have it track the player rotation. So like, let's say you hear a sound here and then you turn away from it, the sound's still coming from like that same place, no matter where you're facing. So you have like this thing that's fixed, but then like you can actually rotate and hear the mix differently, but it never changes the mix or anything like that. It's just rotating the panning around you.
Right.
You did locking in Batman VR, Arkham VR, because it kind of makes sense because you put the helmet and you need to hear the things in it. So technically that makes sense because both speakers in the helmet is one place. So in that case, I think it's kind of makes sense. So.
Yeah. So again, it's all about thinking of. I'm even thinking of various ways of how the mixes of music that we're doing, we can have the user have a different experience with all these different stems, right? So reverb, pretty big topic. So I'm going to say something maybe controversial, but your audio asset should always be dry, raw, as dry as possible. But there are some exceptions. If you're using your audio for an effect, maybe there is some VO or a pre-rendered scene that you know it's going to, a cutscene that you know it's going to happen, and you're going to need it for somewhat of an effect. For a game that I worked on, we just, it was for the Google Daydream. We just baked the reverb onto this big godly-like narrator. That way, we didn't have to worry about that in the engine because that voice always sounded the same. So that's an exception, as an effect, that definitely works. Non-dynamic static sounds. So if you're going to have like crowds, like let's say you're doing a sports game, you're going to have crowds and they're always going to be in the same stadium, they're always going to be in the same sounds. It's probably okay to bake reverb into those because they're going to be, they're not dynamic, they're not moving around, so they're going to be stationary. So that might be also an exception. Non-visual audio cues like thunder, or let's say, or dogs, or a faraway train. It's also fine to bake some reverb. Another thing, pre-baked reverbs or audio sources that has pre-baked reverb in it, they're kind of hard to spatialize because they already have their own space in the file. So if you're going to bake reverb into an audio file and you're going to spatialize it, you're going to be visually getting a different representation of what you're seeing or hearing versus, like, if Emir has this gigantic large hall, but he's only like 5 feet away, that's quite an extreme example, but you get the idea. It's kind of that principle. So there is notable middleware that has pretty decent reverbs and impulse responses. Wise has really good impulse responses. Fmod, again, Steam Audio Engine, Oculus. So all this other stuff can help you with your use of reverb. I'm pretty sure Unity also has reverb in, and Unreal Engine also has its own reverb. So you could definitely use that. A tip that I got from a friend of mine, so a mix of early reflection reverb from Steam Audio Engine or Oculus mixed with the tail reverbs of Wise or Fmod is actually a really good combination of reverbs. So try to use different reverbs from different sources. It actually will, because not every plugin does exactly the same. So mixing and matching would actually get you some really cool desired effects. Reverb is expensive, so be mindful. It is very expensive. And there are some input responses that could break you don't want to be the guy breaking the game for the week. So be mindful of how much you use it, and see your nearest engineer and talk about reverb, definitely. Okay, so why it works. How come VR works? How does audio work in VR? Because of HRTF, head-related transfer function. For those who don't know what that is the mathematical equation of how we perceive sound and how we receive it. So kind of you can get an idea of how we receive sound and how every sound is being reflected very different for each of us, the way it works in our torso, our shoulders, our ears, our head, everything. So there is different measurements of HRTF. So not every single, which that means that not every measurement HRTF will work for the same for everyone else. So everyone's going to hear it a little bit different. There's another challenge that right now everyone's tackling. We can localize higher frequency sounds or higher pitch sounds a lot better naturally. So in VR, if you want to have something that is player focused and you want to make sure that it captures their attention, a higher frequency or higher tone in that sound will be able to be spatialized a little bit better. Okay. So the use of mono spatialization and stereo spreads. It's a tip that I wanted to give you guys that I've experienced in one of my projects. If you have a narrow-minded mix of your sounds, of your mono sounds, for sounds that are going to be far away, that actually is pretty good. So you're going to be able to identify them a little bit better. And using stereo spreads. Now, don't get confused because I've been saying mono, mono, mono. But when I say stereo spreads, is that you can have a mono source far away, and as I get close to it, you can actually start to open up a stereo spread, because once you get close enough, you don't want to get this weird panning effect when you turn your head in front of when you're close to an audio source. So you can use a stereo spread to actually get it pretty good in both ears when you're close, and as you step away, and middlewares like Wise, you can actually set it, or in Unreal Engine, you can actually set it that once you leave a certain amount of distance from that audio source, you can start to close the gap on that stereo spread, and then that becomes back to its mono source. Does that make sense? Does anybody have questions on that? Cool. So the combination of these two is also pretty good for spatialization. Again, Steam Audio Engine spatialization plugins can really help with convincing localization. So more wideband and higher frequencies help with spatialization, driving that home, I guess. Higher frequencies attenuate faster than low frequencies, better for long distance. So, and our ears are actually, and our brains don't localize low frequency sounds that well. So be mindful if your sounds that you're actually making and you need them to be quite important, if they're low in the registers, they're not going to be localized that well. So they're not going to, you're not going to be able to identify them that well if they're really low sounds. Not sounds, but low frequencies. Recommended, but not set in stone. So attenuations, which is really important when it comes to measuring the distance of your sound. So the best attenuation curve that I've read and tried seems to be the inverse square law, or logarithmic, or for your Wise users, the log 3. So this is how a logarithmic curve looks like. And I'm actually going to talk about the way we change it a little bit in games. So the way it works is the farther you get away from a sound, the less volume, and then it's a pretty steep curve. I would recommend to set the minimum radius of that sound, not starting from 0, a little bit more than that, because I've noticed that if I am in front of a sound in VR and then I start to back away, let's say like 3 feet, 5 feet, that sound should still be pretty loud and full of volume. If you keep it just at that curve, by the time you step 3 feet back, you're actually going to hear a significant amount of dB change. And a 5 or plus or minus dB change for normal people, it's quite a significant audio change. So what I would recommend is to not make your minimum fall-off curve for your minimum radius 0, but make it whatever the units of your game is. Make it 10 or 15. So you have space by the time you start to back off. The sound starts to sound pretty natural. So again, use your ear and test minimum radiuses. And also the average listener will, at a 10 dB increase, will actually hear that the sound is doubled. So just use attenuation as, again, mimic real life, but test your minimum radiuses and get a sense of if something's starting to sound pretty low when you're still relatively close to it, maybe increase your radius, increase the minimum radius, and increase the fall off curve. That's also going to help you get pretty convincing attenuation. So here's a curve that I got from the Oculus guys, and you can see it in the Oculus Connect. So what they recommend, this is the standard one that you get. Make it, well, this is one, but make it so it's not starting straight from the source and then you already start the curve. Have an offset so you can get that desired fall-off curve as you're far away. So I wanted to talk about enhancing your audio through all this awesome peripheral. Have you guys ever tried the sub pack? Has anybody tried the sub pack? Yeah, these two guys now. So having these, I would say, VR peripherals really enhances the immersion, the feeling of audio. It's really, really cool. So what the sub pack does, it allows you to feel sub frequencies of from anywhere from 1 to 200 hertz, which is really, really low. So there's a lot of low end that you're not going to be able to get from headphones, but you're going to be able to feel them on your body. That will enhance the experience. That will enhance your audio. And it's actually really, really cool. So because we're mixing for headphones, a lot of people would say, oh, be careful with your low end, because it could get very muddy, but you don't want to overcrowd it and not too much lows. If you know you're going to be developing, or it's maybe your game is tied with sub pack as a unit that you're going to be showing, it might be really cool to boost up your lows and have some. You're going to really feel that low end. It's going to be really, really cool. I tried it. We tried it in our demo, and when I show you that big tablet, that you can literally feel the room shake because you have this haptic vest that you're wearing. It will start to vibrate, and it definitely enhances the audio experience. It immerses you in the experience, and it's really, really cool. Same thing with these gloves. There's haptic VR gloves, and these two gloves and manus. You write them down, check them out. So they have subtle vibrations on your fingertips. Maybe not this one, but I think you can see there's some rings and there's some vibrations along the hands. That will also enhance the perception of you touching things and you're hearing things. So it's all connected. So be mindful of how you are developing your sounds, because you're synchronizing your senses to audio, which is something that we also have to think about. Cool. So what I'm about to show you is an example of a gameplay demo of that tablet room that I was going to show you. And so be mindful of what you're hearing, and then I'm going to ask some questions afterwards.
What the hoot was that? What is this place? It's too dark in here. I wonder if there are any trills around. There we go. Ionian tablet, the land of rhythm. Well, I'm already here, and the Kunkun gave me enough trouble as it is. Is that a Salimba? 7 sigils, 7 lands. Must be a clue. I should look around more to find this out.
As that's spinning, if you were wearing a sub pack, you feel it big time. Cool.
Oh, that's all.
Yeah. But so what did you guys notice sound-wise? I know this is a a stereo speaker here, but what did you guys notice in the ambience of this gameplay?
Once you're like inside the game, after there's kind of one thing happening at a time, so that you can focus on what's happening.
Okay. Did anybody catch the voiceover?
Mm-hmm.
Did anybody notice that the VO is actually not the VO is not realistic to the environment, right? Now, that is actually a game decision, a game design, because you would think, well, if you're talking, you should hear the reverb of the space where you're at, and it should be quite reverberant. But in this case, this is what he's actually thinking, right? So again, it's talk to your game designers, because they may have a different perspective of how you're going to handle audio. So the reason why there was no reverb is because this is what you're actually thinking as the character, as you're picking up these things, and there's all these dialogue cues. Yeah.
So I have a question about that. How does that work well, having voiceover like that? Because it's not you saying anything. Does that not break the immersion at all? Or because I would feel it's that's weird. I'm not thinking that it's just.
I agree. I would, if I was the game developer, I would probably say it's me trying to put you in the place of that character and get you kind of feeling of what he is thinking.
Sure.
I would think that would be something that that's definitely how it was told to me, and that's how we tried it with reverb, and it works great. But once we did some revisions, we said, you know what, let's take the reverb out. Let's do it as if that's what he's thinking, right? Other things, there is some waterfall sounds under. Literally, you can actually see them if you lean over, but there's these huge waterfalls, and they're actually below you. In VR, you can actually hear them. They're actually under you, and because of the reverb in the room, it actually will come up. And again, the tablet, the sound is above you, and as you see, when you finish playing the scale and you start hearing, because you're focused on the keys, and then once you start hearing this spinning of these rocks grinding, then the attention focuses up. So that's kind of like a recapitulation of everything about ambiances, player focus. So these are, yeah.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
One, you were kind of teleporting to do your movement as opposed to walking, for instance.
Right.
And is there within? I've worked in the engine that you guys are working in. Obviously, when you go from one place to another, there's kind of a drastic shift on where all the points are and the volumes shift and things like that. Are there kind of transition points? Can you set, when you teleport from one place to another, can it, quote, kind of crossfade between where it was at, or does it instantly switch?
Actually, that's a really good point. I never had to worry about that because it actually instantly switched for me. When I tried it in the video, when he shoots this sonic trigger that actually turns on the lights, you hear those lights are made of these little trill bugs that are actually trilling, right? And as you teleport away from it, it immediately, once you teleport to the location that you're teleporting to, the sound will actually change. It's that teleportation happens so fast, you really don't perceive it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't feel like an awkward transition?
It doesn't feel like, not at all.
Huh.
But
Not
also
at all.
you can do, there's a lot of experimental we're doing on testing on people which one is better, alongside a lot of other companies too. When you teleport, there's a sound sometimes coming, or there's a little.
We didn't have that yet, but
But
the
it's-
idea is to have a teleporting sound, which will, if anything, it'll mask any weird inconsistencies.
So, and the second question I had is, you sort of have almost a cutscene that play, almost like a movie with inside your thing at
Right.
the end, right? And then creatively, how would you approach? Do you put that as a movie that plays in front of you in speakers, or did you spatialize the world? Does that make sense? Is it like a cutscene that plays that's supposed to be playing in front of you? How creatively did you approach the spatialization on your like little?
Right. So the moment the moment the projector comes on, there's a couple of audio emitters around the screen to have ambiances from that world. So creatively, so there's the 7 modes of C major. That's what you actually have to play. Every time you see one of those lands, I had to create the sound design for that ambience, and there's music for that land that comes up, and you're actually hearing it. So you're actually hearing the music around you, but the ambiences of that world is kind of like just around the screen as our first attempt for our demo. Creatively, that's how we approached it. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions about the gameplay? See what other things I can mention. Yeah. So I knew that the VO was gonna be a little bit of a what happened with the environment. Yeah. So having the teleportation sound, it's also, like I said, is something that can, if you do notice that there's this weird disconnect from the sound where you were to the sound where you're going to be, and a lot of VR games are actually having just a little real cool or techie sound or something to help you with the teleportation. Probably getting a little bit outside of audio. There are some games that don't have teleportation. Some actually have. You can actually use your thumb pad or thumb movement to actually walk. So that's another way of, there's games that are doing it to getting around. They don't want to actually teleport, because teleporting, how realistic is that? So they want to do walking around, but they try to avoid the head bobbing so you don't get dizzy. So that's a couple more, maybe not audio related, but VR stuff. VR audio resources. Take a picture, write them down. You can learn so much from this. Just reading the Oculus Audio SDK website will actually give you an entire background of everything I talked about. The technology, the math, how we work as humans in the ear. Watch these videos, really, really cool stuff. There's now in GDC, there's so much things coming out of GDC with VR and VR audio, which is really cool. Yeah, so I definitely recommend check these out. Look at this one, Lessons in VR Audio Design from The Void. Do you guys know what The Void is? So The Void is this company who has this gigantic warehouse where they map the entire warehouse in 3D. So you can actually walk, you're actually not tied to any, I think you're walking with your own computer or something like that.
Yeah, backpack.
You have this old backpack that you have a gun and everything, and the entire warehouse is mapped exactly to how it is in 3D in your environment. And the audio, I think it's the audio director or one of the sound designers talks about that, and you can actually correlate to a lot what I said. But he talks about using how they use 3 different stages of their sound design. A lot of things that they created in the engine, static sounds, they let the engine deal with it. A lot of the dynamic stuff, like I mentioned before, a lot of dynamic sounds that are moving around, they let the 3D audio plugin take care of it. And then there was a lot of stuff that they pre-baked or pre-rendered for an effect purpose. Really cool talk. Oculus Connect, again, really, really insightful stuff about just how to get some standards or some sounds. I got a lot of the attenuation stuff, information from there. And to wrap it up, I wanted to show you I've been talking a lot about what the game that I'm working on, so I wanted to show you our trailer of what this musical experience is, and then we can open up for Q&A. I think we're good with time. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
team's background mainly comes from live entertainment, writing music for films and video games. So storytelling was always part of who we are. Our journey started 5 years ago when we began crafting a brand new story and creating a unique world inspired by the beginnings of an ancient music, folklore, and sound. The early mythologies of mankind and diverse cultures we all share were extremely special for us. In the end, we began to craft what we call the music mythology by creating a lore that takes cues of what has come before and revealing an uncharted world to the audience.
The concept comes from a very unique perspective of 3 factors: merging music, mythology, and history, opening up a playground for artists from all around the world to come together, brainstorm, and create something that's never been done before, while having the prints of something very familiar. We look at music theory and instruments, parts of history and human folklore for inspiration and forming the mythology around it. This is where music theory and ancient instruments turn into creatures, characters, ecosystems, architecture, and more. And at that point, it becomes something very special.
We have a fantastic story. It's taken 5 years just to develop the concept. Our team has spent countless nights brainstorming on characters, lands, people, ecosystems, and we're excited to share what we have.
In our game, we are focusing on many new game mechanics to deliver that realistic immersion. For example, imagine yourself you're in an ancient throne room before a king and you're surrounded by other characters who kneel down and bow to that king. We programmed the AI to do this, which would suggest that you should also kneel down and bow as well. If you do, the storyline may progress normally, and if you don't, the characters may get annoyed and the game will either not progress or you'll have to face some alternative consequences on an alternative storyline arc. This is just one example of the many game mechanics that we are pursuing.
We want to achieve optimal sound immersion, which means audio has to be great and realistic as much as visuals. Since we're creating a world inspired by music, we need to pay attention to every detail of sound. We are inspiring to tackle new approaches in how we manipulate music and sound in VR environments. Imagine yourself having the ability not only to hear, but to feel and control sound and music in new ways, which brings the importance of sound in our world to new heights.
On a project like this, one of the most important things to get it right was the score. Over the years, we have worked with thousands of musicians from all over the world, and now we are very excited to include them in this project. So we are going to be recording the soundtrack live with a full orchestra and a choir, accompanying the story in an epic fashion.
Our story takes place in the supercontinent of Pangaea. After a war that involves all the 7 lands, the continents begin to fall apart following an event we call the Grand Split, which marks the end of the war. The main story takes place hundreds of years later with our 13-year-old protagonist, Lyra Lut, who grew up in a small isolated town, taking care of her sick mother. The mother's illness not even letting recognize her own daughter. Because of that, Lyra keeps looking for a way to cure the mother, and she eventually goes on a journey of discovery. When we are designing, looking at the science and inspiration for the architecture for the locations in the story, music still plays a primal role as far as how everything functions together.
As a player, you'll play many different characters and discover the school's secrets. As Lyra, you'll be in between the choice of saving your mother or unite Pangaea back together. Our main focus when creating costumes and props is the storyline, especially in a musical world where we have to think about how the designs will function within the environment and interact with the characters.
Unreal Engine gives us great advantage to build the world of ROTU in a stylized, realistic environment. With its physical-based rendering, we can get nearly lifelike materials that look like real metals, wood, or cloth. The engine's VR capabilities create a great platform for us to tell our story. This way, all the assets the teams create, ranging from fully fleshed characters to props, can be appreciated in full view in VR.
Music mythology brings a unique and fresh concept to the entertainment industry through VR. It reconnects the audiences with the basic elements of the universe: rhythm, melody, and harmony, all of which are somewhat lacking in today's world.
It's hard to pinpoint just one area to talk about the game and the story, but if I had to choose, it definitely would be the fact that we turn music theory into superpowers. We call this modus. For example, we're using traditional conducting patterns to allow our users gestures that control environments, animals, and NPCs.
In today's world, we believe video games are a great medium to train ourselves, and it has been shaping our lives for the past 45 years. That's why it is important to look at what kind of messages you give to the future generations. We can't wait to share what we have been developing with the rest of the world.
That's it. A little lengthy, I know. Well, we want to, I think, Rachel, you want to open it up for Q&A? I think we've already been asking a lot of questions, but if anybody wants to open it up, yeah.
Have you done a lot of ambisonics work on this project?
No, almost not much, not really.
Are you going to?
I think we are. We think we bought an ambisonics microphone, and definitely that's something that we want to include. We want to capture. The thing about ambisonics is that you have to actually find the locations where you want to record, and for the exotic places in our game, that might not be easy, you know. But there is ways to create ambisonic files, like B format ambisonic files, using mono and plugins. When I talked about noisemakers, they actually make I think it's called the AmbiHead. I think they have something called the AmbiHead converter, where you can actually, if you're, let's say you have Pro Tools HD, you can bring in mono sources in a 4-channel setup, pan them, and you can actually pan them in space, and then that will convert those 4 tracks into a B format file, which you can put into the engine, and you can create essentially what you would be doing with a ambisonic microphone. So there is ways to create it and go around it if you don't have the luxury of going to a crystal world or something, you know. But yeah, ambisonics is also another really cool thing about VR audio that you can explore.
This isn't technically a VR question. I'm just actually curious about the trajectory of this project.
Yeah.
I feel like I remember, and I'm pretty sure it's clear, like 5 or 6 years ago, I remember Rhythm of the Universe being like a live performance ensemble.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious, because the game obviously looks fantastic.
Thank you.
How did you guys transition, and what was sort of the pivot point to going from a live performance group to creating a really cool virtual reality game? Like, what put you on that kind of journey?
I'll probably let him talk about it, but what I can say is, through all those years, a narrative started to create, because as a show, there is somewhat of a story that he created. That from there, somewhat of a narrative started to be created, and then there were some characters that you would see on stage, and it's the stage show, kind of like Cirque du Soleil-ish, you know, in a way. from that grew this narrative of all these characters, and that was the foundation of what eventually came to be a graphic novel. And then they created a story that took 5-6 years, and now we have all this concept art, and that led to how do we tell, what's the best medium to tell the story. And then once VR came in 2.5 years ago or 3 years ago, we went, hey, let's do it in VR, because that's the best way we think that we can make you experience a musical show in VR where you can actually interact with. Kind of.
Yeah, no, I think he nailed down and everything that I was gonna say. You know, those days, I think we were in a search, as like we were pretty big team those days. You know, I remember. I mean, I was still in Michael class, and I think we all passed your class, and you know, you somehow touched us with very, you know, lucky hand. So you know, all of us going in a path that I never thought that I'm gonna be a game developer, but you know, it turned out that after many years later, we came the deal around. So we did many years those live shows, and I think, as he said, it really inspired us a lot. But I think the core was always bringing the whole world together, the cultures, all those messages. Yeah. But I think always we had this obsession of creating a franchise with story-based franchise. Like we all grew up, you know, Star Wars and all those geeky things that, you know, everybody, you know, want to go that path. But I think pursuing that, and me started, you know, writing this story 5 years ago, and then talking with the team, guys, I mean, you know, I don't think this is going in the direction that we wanted. What if we turn this entire thing to a more cinematic show? I said, okay, let's start the work on this show, which this project was called Pangea those days. And we started working on the show. Then we realized it's not realistic unless you're becoming a Blue Man Group and franchisable, that you replicate yourself. It's very, you know, easy to, you know, turn into a capital. Then we said, okay, this is not going in a good direction. Why don't we turn into this a franchise, as like everybody does? But no one gonna give us $300 million to do a movie. So what is the easiest thing to do? Okay, let's do it graphic novel. We decided maybe we can do more animated things, because we always was interested to do films, you know, documentaries, music videos, and that core thing we carried, but we didn't know how we're gonna put it. As he said, the moment virtual reality turned into consumer market, when I tried, I said, we stop everything, don't do it, this is gonna be our rest of our lives. Then we started developing everything there.
Okay, that's super cool. It's
No,
a very
thank
long
you.
story, and it
No,
was one
thank
that I
you
was
to
really
hear
curious
that.
to hear about. And
Yeah,
I was like,
thank
I
you.
remember this.
I'm
really
glad
cool.
to hear that. Yeah, and it was still Pangea name, and a lot of people said, look, you guys have the coolest name, and barely a couple of people know, and I think Pangea is the least musical name. Why don't you use ROTU? It makes sense. Rhythm of the Universe, you know, completely goes to the franchise. Do it. We're like, sure. We already have the trademark anyway, so let's do it. So.
Yeah. And I think personally, this is a really amazing project to be an audio director or a sound designer or a composer. It's really the ultimate playground for music, because everything in this world is musical. Like you saw in the video, architecture and the clothing, the creatures, everything has little tiny Easter eggs of music. So there is so much, like Charlie said in the video, there's a playground, not only for artists, but for sound designers. We've interviewed some sound designers that when we tell them what the game is and what the story is, they're just like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like all this for music, and they see the creatures, and the creatures are related to music and drums, and they're like, okay, and they start getting ideas. And so it's actually, I'm actually really happy to be involved, and you know, it's the creative juices just like start flowing, because there's so much music capabilities. Yeah.
Do you guys, so 2 questions that I have
Yeah.
in relationship to that. One is sort of the timeline moving forward of when you plan on having this in the marketplace, and then 2, how, if you guys are willing to talk about this a little bit in terms of the funding that's happened and is happening, do you go for fundraising opportunities? Are you looking at publishers? Because a lot of us in here are doing indie games. And experimental is really hard,
right,
because there isn't dollar signs at the end. Sometimes don't exist in the same way that if you're producing that Call of Duty, right?
Right.
And just talk a little bit, so timeline and also how the project, is moving forward.
So as far as timeline, we sat down and we realistically thought of we first said what is the main long-term goal. Then we said, okay, let's truncate that into realistic development cycles that we can actually start to profit from at least the first episode. Let's say we make it episodic. For the first episode of the first small game, then you can start to say, okay, it might take 9 months to a year just to make the smaller experience. Then you get some revenue from that, and then you go for the next one. As that's making revenue, then you can already start making a name for yourself, start establish the franchise, then you can start going and growing as the episodes go. I think kind of that's how we structured it.
No, that's definitely, as he said, we following the episodic round. As right now, what's happening is in VR, everybody focuses on maximum 20 minutes. I mean, us, we focusing on sometimes an hour if it's something that's really good, but healthier people saying that 15 to 25 minutes is the attention spent. So, and I think that's where we focusing on each episode. So in each episode connected to each other, it's a linear story, but there's a lot of things to do inside the episode. So we designing the carnival area, so you can follow the path on the main mission, but at the same time you can go. There are imagine a carnival. There's a lot of games on the side. So in VR, gaming a game. So we creating a musical tabletop games. Based on the mathematical algorithms and everything. So as far as funding, it's all based on connections, as you know. So you either goes to angels, you either goes to people that know you, or you go to VCs. But right now, the biggest problem with VC is everybody investing hardware.
And that's a venture capitalist for those that you don't know.
Yeah, and the biggest problem with venture capitalists we fighting is they investing on hardware. So we say, well, if you don't invest in awesome content, you're not gonna. Doesn't matter that you have an amazing hardware. So there are mixed feelings. So the big companies in HTC, Oculus, and right now Microsoft, they all started investing individual indie developers, because now VR content is very hype and not that much developer out there. Not that much gaming out there too. So now we have very big advantage on that compared to doing a console gaming. So in between, there is not that much answer. So we had a pre-production investment. It gave us here all the way, which we got lucky. But now we are in the phase of raising money for the first episode, and that first episode is actually proving the concept. The prototype, as he said, we're putting
kind of like a vertical slice of sort.
Yeah. Right. So we actually just established today a great partnership with Mimic Productions, which these guys did avatar motion capture and facial capture. So they are actually supporting us to working on this project. They're gonna do our facial rigging and mocap rigging to all those things. So that partnership also is really good on us, because given our backgrounds, no matter what, how strong this project is, still, us compared to others, we are a baby, in this, in this industry. Especially always they look at your past, what you're doing it, but once you get, strong allies in the industry established, when they say that they're supporting you, your credentials automatically going really up.
And something that has actually been astonishing for us is that a lot of heads of departments or CEOs or founders, a lot of them have been musicians.
Oh yeah.
So when we show them this, they go, you get them at the core as they're musicians, and they go, wow, this is really cool. And that's why we were fortunate enough to get the support from Mimic Productions. And when they saw it, they were like, oh, wow, that's really cool. You're doing all this with music. And that it draws the interest, and then we're able to move forward from the demo, and then
And I think the
take it from
industry
there.
is really hungry for original content.
Yeah.
And if
New
all
IP
of
is-
you know, we keep eating from the past because that's a bigger AAA companies or any movie company. It's safe. It's
Right.
a safe investment because it's gonna turn into revenue. But at the same time, the game world is amazing because right now today only the indie developers coming up with the very awesome ideas, very nice storylines, and that start to putting us in somewhere very original content. But in VR, the biggest problem that we were putting in our business presentation, 90% games are zombie shooting, exploding the heads, and it's all about violence and stuff. There is no very beautiful linear storyline.
There is a couple.
But yeah, 10%.
Yeah.
It's and then that's big problem on that side too. So you don't see a Skyrim yet, which is coming. We're so happy. You don't see like Last of Us, Uncharted, that kind of very narrative and long games that we appreciate. But in VR, that's ultimately even amazing because you're literally there. So, and I think that's why we right now pursuing a little bit more, less violent.
Can I ask any of you guys, are you guys working on any VR games now? And did any of what I talked about kind of like, you went, man, yeah, I mean, I went through that, or I totally agree, or he's full of,
I'm not working on a game specifically, but I've been messing around with ambisonics a lot lately.
Okay, yeah.
And some of the, and like 360 video and stuff like that.
Right.
And some of the problems that I've had with ambisonics are, like, for example, just using like an H2N, like pretty like low budget stuff. But things like when you turn your head, the illusion of something shifting to be next to your ear or to the right of your ear, for some reason it sounds like it comes up in volume, or like it's in other words, it's not a perfect sphere. It'll be like more of like a figure 8 sphere.
Right, yeah.
Like it's kind of this weird illusion. So I don't know if it seems like you're not doing very much ambisonic stuff.
Not yet.
But do you have any tips on like how to mix that stuff so that when you turn your head, I could I don't know, maybe that's a wise thing.
From what I've researched, is really comes to the importance of how you capture it. It's really how you. Well, if you had if you had an actual ambisonic microphone, you wouldn't have to worry about that because they're actually properly placed and created just to capture a spherical 3D audio, right, in the ambience. But if you're using an H2N, I think it really isn't how you place it. But are you using two, or does it have a?
Just a single H2N. The H2N has a spatialized software thing, and it's still using whatever microphones are.
Right, it's using the two.
Yeah, I think it does a mid-side thing as well. It has like 4 different. But I've never opened one up. I'd love to see what's on the inside, but I assume that there's not 4 different kinds of microphones, and like one of those would be ambisonic.
What I would recommend is maybe try what I was saying. Not fake it, but do it through a different means. Like actually get different mono sources, put it into. I mean, the only way I know is you have to use Pro Tools HD because Pro Tools HD allows you to do quad channels and 5.1 and multi-channel mixes. Yeah. Then create your scene in your DAW, and then maybe you can actually download the plugins for free and try them out before you buy them. And they're not that expensive. I think they're like $200 just for the converter. But try it that way. You might get better results on that problem you may have.
You mean using an ambisonic microphone, or just using 4 microphones?
You can use just one.
Oh, just use
You can
one
just
mono.
record mono sources. You make them into a loop.
Yeah.
Then you actually map it out in like what I was showing you in the Oculus VST. You can actually do automation on where the sound is traveling, right? You can actually do it on your Z-axis and everything.
Sure.
Then you convert it into one file, which the 4 channels converts down to the B format that is that you need for ambisonics, then the engine will read that. But there is other ways of, like, I don't have an ambisonic mic. We just got one recently, and I still haven't tried it out. But there is ways to still go around that, especially for 3D 360 video.
As you said, like, I think you're right. It's, if you do in very photorealistic environment and close to the world, I think makes sense to go in location shooting. Yeah. But we have such odd places that we're creating it. I mean, it doesn't even exist in this planet. So it's sometimes I don't know how we would benefit. I think certain places we might, like in a very
like
box
we
room.
have a land that is you're in a city. Well, we're living in a city, they'll be perfect. You can just go to downtown and put an ambisonic microphone and capture some stuff. I mean, maybe we don't have cars, but my point is, in environments for like city-like, ambisonics would be great. But nature environments, yeah, I can go to the woods and get some stuff. That would be great too. But at least for us, that's more challenging. I think. Did you have a question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, yeah, no, you.
Whatever.
Yeah.
So I'm working on Holland. And
Okay.
I was wondering, one of the challenges is like also like not to overcrowd like the scene like sound-wise. So how do you deal with like having the right amount of things so that it draws your attention without having like stuff everywhere and it's just like I don't know where to focus?
Well, you're talking about AR, right?
Yeah,
but it's still
VR,
the same thing, right?
Yes, yeah.
I would say it's really all about your mixing, really. If you need something to be focused and there's a lot of things around you, there's going to have to be some submixing that you're going to have to do. Lower some things just slightly, or maybe just increase the volume of what you need the player to focus in, and that will help you draw the attention. And like I said, if there's something that really is important that you need the player to focus on audio-wise, doing higher frequencies and things like that we can identify better over long distances and we can identify easier, that'll definitely help. I think I saw this VR experience. They had the same problem. I think it was like a miner. They were like you're in a railway underground, like a miner game, and they had a little cutscene where they needed the player to really focus. They literally needed them to turn around and see something so they know where to go next in the story. And they noticed that if they didn't have subtle, like a crumbling rock that actually was a little bit startling, but that was enough for them to kind of glance over at what just happened. So horror game kind of tactics could also help. Something that could really capture their attention and just do it, and then, or just lower the mix a little and then let that stand out and then maybe raise it up. There's a lot of balancing. I think that'll be a way of.
There's also some good talks about how they raycast in front, right, and then sources in front of the player end up getting boosted a little bit more too.
Focusing, yeah.
So in terms of it ends up being this cacophony that's kind of around, and that can be really intimidating for first-time VR players, right, to be sort of immersed. One of the things that you can do is kind of focus their attention, what's on in front of them, and then attenuate sources that are to the left and behind.
Right. Yeah.
In the first episode, actually, that what I like to write and put it, if anywhere that we're gonna focus, and this is we've been talking with Cesar, if the player looks at anywhere, I like to write always a guide people. If someone's coming and you don't see this behind you, and that person gets annoyed, hello, look at me, and then you turn, oh, okay, can you come with me? So that person guides you in a certain spot that we want, let's say the rock gonna fall or something, and you have to follow that person, and until you find that person actually finds you, trying to get your attention. And I think in VR, those are the things you're trying, because it's everywhere that someone needs to take your attention, or creature, or anything.
Yeah, but to add on to what Michael said, Wise has the same thing. You have a cone of focus, and you can actually, as the source goes around you, once it exits that angle focus, you can actually start to lower the volume and do a low pass filter. So when it's behind you, you can actually, it almost seems as you're occluding the sound, kind of, and then sounds that are behind you will be lower in volume. You can also have a little bit of low pass filter, and that way, whatever you're looking ahead, like you said, you will actually have a focus. That is definitely a really good point. You can also, I don't know, you guys use Unity, right? Have you used Unity?
I'm doing, so I'm not, it's not quite a game. I'm working on doing VR experiments and designing applications at MIT Media Lab.
Okay.
And then we're mostly using Unity for most of the stuff. And yeah, I mean, in terms of the panning, we're also using Wise. So most of the audio is going through Wise.
But let me ask you something. So in Unity, they also have, does Unity, because I'm using Unity now, but I'm not really that good for audio there. Does Unity have, but does Unity have an audio focus, kind of like Wise does? No, right?
No, you'd have to do that within Wise, or you'd have to just script it
Script
yourself.
it, right. So in Unreal 4, there is something called audio focus, where you can actually set the azimuths of the angles of the sound. It works exactly the same way as Wise does for that.
Yeah, Unity only has spherical sound sources also. Like it doesn't, you can't do like conical ones like
Right.
you can in Unreal. So.
Yeah. Oh, I guess that is something I completely forgot to mention. There is other attenuation shapes. Use spheres. For VR, just definitely stick to spheres because it's a little weird when you have cone attenuations and you literally just step outside the cone and the sound's gone. That's a little weird because sound is really everywhere. I think there's very specific cases you might want to use that. I think I've seen some cases for, let's say you're doing like a security camera and you need to be able to, you're doing something very specific with that camera where that camera is looking, you kind of want to hear an alarm or a timer that's going to go off so you step outside of the cone of view. They would use the same cone attenuation so you can kind of like step out and then you know you're safe, right? That's very specific, but just use spheres for your attenuations. That's definitely the way to go. Yeah. But yeah, you were saying about the Media Lab.
Oh yeah, I mean, wait, what do you want me to say about?
No, you were mentioning. I kind of cut you off.
Oh no, yeah, I mean, I was just mentioning. Yeah, I'm working on
Cool.
the VR experiments. They have like this sort of virtual playground.
Okay.
Ideas to be able to teach classes and do like physics experiments.
And
stuff like that.
let me ask you, how many objects can you actually interact with in your
At
experience?
any given time, I guess only really 2, like with the number of hands you have.
Okay.
Right now, I'd say there's probably several hundred different objects in the
Several
application.
hundred, wow.
Yeah.
So,
but
wow.
right now, what we've been focusing on, so I'm the audio lead. There's 3 other sound designers, and then what I've been having everyone focus on is just like creating sort of what I would call generic sounds and UI stuff to just have like a sound for everything that kind of works. So you have different fruits you can spawn and like throw them around,
right?
Put them in, like you can build baskets and whatever. It's a lot of silly stuff. But right now it's like you have like one fruit sound that is for all fruits, and then I just have an RTPC for the size of the object that just pitches it up and down.
Right.
Eventually, the idea is like long term, probably we'll start making more specific sounds for everything. The only thing is that then we might end up with like a 100 gigabyte game that's
well, that's exactly what I was going to bring up. The more objects you have, and the more think of it as like a matrix. The more that you have, the more you have to interact. Then it gets into the millions of possibilities, right?
So now what we've been dealing with is I have blend containers with sort of like so you have tagged layers of the sound. So if it's a fruit, we'll put like it's a fruit, and then it's like it's a hard fruit, it's a soft fruit, and then I don't know, it's big or small. And then there's like 3 different layers, and then those layers will blend, and that gives us like a sort of fake impression of there being a lot more sounds. Good.
Yeah. Okay. That was my next question. How are you tackling the use of multiple surfaces and multiple sounds, and this sound versus the environment, this sound versus object, this sound versus everything? You know what I mean?
Yeah, most recent thing I developed with the ambiences, so it was kind of interesting for you to hear you about talking about that, just because I did a lot of like sort of trial and error with that, but I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. But it's kind of a complicated system.
I mean, from what I talked to a friend of mine. He's his name is Daniel Perry. He's the audio director at Alchemy Labs. When he came to Berklee and he showed Job Simulator, and that was one of the topics was the immense. He showed us like this graph and this spreadsheet of every sound versus everything else, and it was just once he did the computations, it was like you could have. It gets into the, like I said, like the millions of combinations of sounds, and how did they approach making sure that this object versus that, and that versus itself, and that versus the environment. And so I don't think he got into too much detail, maybe because he couldn't explain why, but from what he said he had long talks with the engineer, and they had to build a physics system. Most games will have their own physics systems. I think the way you were talking about having a hard versus soft and generics versus how you're hitting depending on what surface you're hitting, that will give you multiple combinations, and then applying randomized pitching, that's definitely going to help. But the soft and hard and maybe another hard, medium, soft versus all these other materials that you're going to be hitting, that's then you start multiplying it, and then the more objects you have, the crazier it's going to get, and the harder it is to manage everything. Because like in Job Simulator, you have a stapler, you have your keyboard, but you can grab the stapler and smack the keyboard. Then you have to think, what material do I have versus what material am I going to hit? What object do I have versus what material I'm going to hit, and what object am I going to hit? So you start to see it's just a web of, and that gets crazy. But I think like you were saying, doing the hard soft, that's a pretty good way to go. I mean, do you have any recommendations on? Are you?
Well, I'm just a participant. I'm an audience.
Well, we're
but the idea, like, most games run into that.
Right.
Battlefield, like, is such, like, their team. They are such experts at at tagging all their materials, so you can they know whether it's wood or stone or brick and shooting at it or exploding it, and it's just like mind-boggling how well their team does to get all the materials right, because you basically can blow up anything, right? And you get a combination of like wood and stone and I don't know, hay and wood, like all this stuff. And they've given some really great talks about how they've sort of parsed down the most valuable information, and then they start combining it. And so explosions have, they might be small, medium, and large, but they'll make an explosion have different components based on the type of explosion, whether it's more fiery or more of a impactful underground thing or whatever. But it applies to VR in exponential ways because, and the question is, when do we get to the point where we're generating sounds algorithmically, where you have a plugin, you have like this new like Havoc sound plugin that basically says, all right, I know the physics of this pencil, and when I drop the pencil on the desk, I know the physics of the desk, and I know its resonant properties, and I know that thing, and then I just play it, right? And
or
they don't
also
need
velocity
any of us anymore, right?
And velocity too.
So that's coming. Is it 10 years down the road, 20 years? But we'll probably see it within our lifetime, more of that, because people are modeling violins in real time and things like that. So it's likely that we'll see more of this in games, a piece at a time, right?
Surprisingly little out there on procedural audio. Like there's very little.
Yeah.
There's one book, Andy Farnell's, like what is it called? Procedural sound design. I think it's just what it's called, something like that.
Yeah, or just sound design. It's like got a kind of generic title.
Yeah,
that's
really generic
one of the best books out there.
It's basically the only one. Also, his patches are really like functional, but they all kind of sound terrible too. Like,
well,
they sound
as you would
pretty
imagine
awful.
from the beginning
like,
of anything.
It's not good procedural sound design. It's just good concepts. And then I just think it's interesting that it's like now we're talking about it more, but there's still nothing about it out there. Yeah, it's also very procedural sound design is so tedious. It's, oh my god, it's so tedious.
Yeah, I would just let them deal with it, and then they make an easy plugin, and then we got to use it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How would you go like about like dialogue? Because like you know, like I was like when you work with dialogue, like in VR especially, because you're so immersed. How do you like manage it? Because like there's so many things that go through communication, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you deal with that? Like if you have like a story like that, how do you deal with like the interaction with one another? Like how you know like how it doesn't feel like you know, hey, I'm an AI, like AI, right?
Right. I mean, that's another. I think it's another problem and hurdle that you need to jump, because I think a VO in VR isn't that much different to what it is for now for an adventure game.
Okay.
Let's say you're playing Skyrim. Right now, you can walk away, and what they do is, if this, and again, if it's player focused, an important line, they'll focus on that line. But when you turn away, they do also low pass filtering, and then if they turn, you know, that same thing happens. So in VR, it really doesn't change that much. Again,
I guess
it makes it harder. But it makes it harder because you have the ability to also ignore it if you want to. You know what I mean? Just like you do in Skyrim. You know?
Yeah, that's what I was going. Like my question was more like how does
to
it feel realistic? Because like if you turn away and he continues to talk, even if you know it's from behind, you know it doesn't break the immersion. That's like you know what I'm thinking is like if like it ignores the fact that you're ignoring it, you know, then like wouldn't that break the immersion? Because you're like, oh, okay, it's.
Well, I don't know. I don't think it would break the immersion, because if you choose to ignore it, you know that you're ignoring it, thus it sounds different. Because if I turn around and you're talking, it will sound different for me right now in real life. Same thing happens in VR.
Theoretically, our AI has to be better. The character will say, "Hey, why are you turning away from me?"
That's what
It's exactly what he was talking
And that
about.
gets into like the other side of things, which is the game design component.
Yes.
The AI, our AI has to be so much better than
There's
the
so-
AI. It's like terrible.
My easy
And
answer.
It's really hard to program.
My easy answer is it's not your fault.
It's, you know, it's,
No.
if it's breaking the immersion, that means a poor game design. It's for me, and that's I can say that.
So just to the final point on that is, and what Michael said is perfect. It's talk to the game designer, and if you're the audio guy who said, "Hey man, this is something you may want to fix," that's awesome. You're the guy who saved the game, you know. But communication, super key, because you are the audio guy and you are extremely important, because the immersion matters on you, but you also have to say, hey man, there's not much I can do in audio now. If I'm not focusing, maybe you can have the animation do, or try to capture my attention somehow by the voice actor, or change the lines and say, hey, you know, over here, kind of thing. And there has been games that do that, you know.
Well, Bioshock does it.
Yeah.
You know, they've been doing it a lot.
Yeah, it's true. Yes.
I was going to ask if you guys are, I mean, the clip that you showed, there's only one character, and that person, the thoughts are entirely in their own head.
Right.
Are you guys going to have to deal with NPCs down the road?
Yes.
Like, to what degree? Like, just one at a time? Are there going to be many NPCs in a city that you can interact with? Or so how do you plan to execute that?
I don't know. He's the game designer.
I watched this video on Radiant AI. Well, in the video they talked about it was like this 5-hour-long review of Oblivion. I don't know if you guys have seen this YouTube video. There's a YouTube video that this guy did. It must have taken him a year. Like I have no idea how he did it, but it's 5 hours long, just like 3 minutes shy of 5 hours long, and the entire thing is talking about the pluses and minuses of Oblivion in comparison to other RPGs, and it's fascinating. Yeah, I watched the whole thing. Like I didn't do it in one sitting. It took me about a month, but like I just did it over the course. Like I'd have lunch, 15 minutes here, whatever. But it's really interesting, and he spends a good chunk of that on Radiant AI and the pluses and minuses to it. And I remember when I was playing Oblivion specifically, but also Skyrim, and you know, I wasn't very critical, so like the whole take an arrow to a knee thing was just kind of comedic to me. But once you realize that, yeah, it really does break the immersion. It makes you laugh at the game. That's a really negative thing. So like, are you guys thinking about that stuff, and how are you thinking about?
I mean, we're still talking. We're doing a lot of experimental. We're trying to figure out what to do. But I think one of two great examples we're taking for our game. One, BioShock Infinite. The other one, Uncharted, and they did this pretty well with being in a crowd. What other people doing?
Assassin's Creed also did some really good stuff.
When you get closer, what they saying, and so that, as he said, doesn't change in VR. What changes how to behave in VR.
Right.
So now you don't have the the controllers. Now you have your arm. If you go in there, if you slap the guy, I mean, if your hands goes inside the head, if it doesn't do, done, fake.
Right.
That game is fake. So if you do it, the guy saying, "What the fuck are you doing?" And then they start to coming at you, they start to beating at you, and game over, and you start from the beginning. Then you're like, oh, I guess I shouldn't do that. So that kind of things, or you taking a coin and throwing the guy. It's like, who was that? So it's a lot of work.
It ties to
do
the
it
AI.
right, but
It scales up a lot.
Yeah, and you have to do it.
I mean,
pages of pages writing, and then he has this chart, and okay, now we're gonna go to
now I have to worry about his coin that he threw. Like, oh, now I have to make sure that,
but also,
audio-wise, everything.
Yeah, but also that one thing, and then all the things that they say it. So like list of like hundreds of dialogue. You get into one crowd and they talking about what they talking about. That's an Easter egg. You can stand and you can hear them, but you can go and you can sit down with the guy on the floor this time.
Yeah, GTA, Watch Dogs, they all do that.
Yeah.
Like you can go up to and just hear a guy play guitar and Watch Dogs.
That's actually a good idea.
We're gonna have performances.
Yeah.
Because we come from that background. You're gonna be able to go to a city square in Ionia, and then that's one of the lands, and you're gonna be able to just to be amongst the crowd, and as they're playing, since you learn the ability to conduct, you will affect how they perform.
Yeah, that one.
So
thing
it's just.
It's like
that's
you
gonna
can
be really cool.
also like that's one thing that we love about VR. Like you can play, but also you can stand and enjoy, just as like you go into any carnival or anything, and you can get in the boat. The guys start to sing, and you're watching, and wow, this guy is terrible, or like this guy is good. And one of the areas that we were thinking, the emotion. It's every area is good, but also if the facial animations and anything is not that great, that's also breaks.
Yeah, but it's an interesting conversation though, because I think the key word here is priorities, because perfection is never a possibility, and it will never be a possibility.
You're absolutely right.
Star Citizen is still being in development.
Exactly. That line is the key.
So I mean, and that's the thing I was going to say about Skyrim. When I played Skyrim the first time, it didn't occur to me that the immersion was being broken every time somebody said I took an arrow to the knee. It wasn't until I played it maybe the second time, or I was in my 300th hour, or whatever for whoever's playing the game. So I don't know. Like for example, the thing you said about like the hand slap, I think it would be a huge nuisance if I had to restart the game because like I accidentally slap their face or something like that, or like if I flip a coin and it hits them in the face and they react to that, like especially if like they do that, but they don't do the rest of it. There's not like you can't say sorry. And you can't have that awkward conversation of like, oh, I totally didn't mean to do that, or trying to be confrontational. Yeah. Like that's the other thing is that those are two different things that could just be expressed by your face.
Well, I have been toying with the idea because the Vive does have a microphone. I've been toying with the idea that you might be able to in our game to actually talk back.
Whoa.
And have because. NPCs can now have listening capabilities. You can have that. And they have that because of if you're kind of walking quietly and you're exploring, they won't hear you. So there is a listener for the NPC. We've been talking back and forth of having the ability not only to, do all these other things, but maybe have to bridge that fourth wall kind of thing, just to maybe talk.
Microsoft has like that for like you can do voice commands for HoloLens and stuff. And it's like really accurate. Like
There's
you can
this
have
company we talk. What was your friend? They came. They found us at the PAX. This company does in Boston very big experimentals. You're talking it, and that's their narrative.
Echo? No.
Yeah, something. And these guys are actually coming from the game. They did Telltale Games. So the main guy quit the Telltale and now started this company, and they're trying to do this voice
ear something?
over.
Earplug.
So yeah.
Earplug.
So now you're able to talk to the character, and character responds to you.
Right.
So they're doing these experimentals, but I think that's gonna come.
But we might, I mean,
not there yet.
speech is a whole different world. We might do sounds like a whistle, maybe a couple tones, something they would recognize because to stay musical. Because if we start talking about talking, then
We
it's
do
a whole different
gestures,
thing.
like, that doesn't imply what you were saying. Like if I hit accidentally, the guy comes at you, obviously he's not gonna kill you first, but gonna warn you probably, and then the program this out, it's gonna say sorry automatically because that's what we programmed in AI. But there are certain places you just like doing this with vibe, and other person, oh okay, he's just waving, or like as we were showing in the video, like you bowing, you laying down, because character gonna tell you, hey, lay down, and you're gonna lay down. You're gonna see the character, okay, we're gonna get up, and wait 3 seconds, you're gonna get up. So these kind of things actually now is very immersive than obviously in a console game, because in console games just the camera make you do all those things.
QTEs.